A lot of people are still holding on to GPUs like the 1060. I'm going to be testing the 6GB version in this video, but there's a lot of similar GPUs or even weaker GPUs that are still quite popular. According to the Steam hardware survey, we see cards like the 1650, the 1050 Ti, and cards that are maybe a little bit stronger like the 1660, but still in a similar ballpark. And these GPUs really, I think a lot of people are holding on to them longer than they would have originally wanted to due to the whole crypto boom throwing the GPU market just completely out of control during the 30 series. And now we're getting in the 40 series and we're seeing a very lackluster reviews on the newer cards. So in this video, we're going to look at what are some upgrading alternatives? Are they worth it? What do you actually get for the money on the upgrade? And also, what sort of prices should we look at here? So I am not an economist, believe it or not, but I did Google an inflation calculator, and like a card like the 1060, 6GB launched at $250 on the cheapest third-party models, up to around $300, I think, on the Founders Edition. And in $2016, if you convert $250, if we go with the low end, into $2023, then we get to around $320 in today's money. So I'm going to put that as the ceiling of the GPUs that I want to look at in this video, and that would put us around the 6700 XT from AMD. And then we'll look at cards like the 4060, which is the namesake competitor and is a little bit lower in price than the 6700 XT. And then we'll look at what if you're really strapped on your budget. We'll look at cards like the RX 6600. Also, you should definitely sell your old hardware to help fund your upgrade. A lot of people miss this, and it can bring a better GPU into your price range. Today's sponsor, Jawa.gg, offers very compelling options for how to do this. Now, they do offer the option where you list the card for sale yourself, you manage the listing, you wait for a buyer, all of that. Now, I've noticed that some people just don't want to deal with that. They don't want to wait around for a buyer, deal with a third party. And so Jawa does offer a very interesting hassle-free alternative for people who don't want to wait for a buyer or deal with anything that goes along with that, where you just sell directly to Jawa themselves. You tell them your GPU model and condition, they offer you a price immediately, you ship the GPU to Jawa, they receive it, inspect it, and pay you in one business day. So definitely take a look at this. Also, you can shop for used and new hardware on Jawa, and you should definitely take advantage of this if the cards I'm looking at today are still just, out of your price range, or you're just interested in exploring the used market, because today's video I am focusing on new pricing, but again, exploring Jawa for used pricing would also be a very attractive option. Now, let's go ahead and jump into some benchmarks where I'm looking at the 1066GB up against the RX 6600 from AMD, which has been as low as $180 recently. And then we'll look at the 4060. What is the newest generation NVIDIA GPU offering here for you compared to your 1060? And then the 6700 XT, which, like I said, puts us at our top end around $320 or so, of where we would be in the same price class as what you bought if you bought your 1060. Let's look at some head-to-head comparisons. All right, we're going to be looking at some of the latest games, but we'll start out with Resident Evil 4 on the prioritized graphics preset, and this is even kicking on some upscaling with FSR2 quality, which the GTX card can take advantage of, and it can get around 50 frames per second at these settings, and of course you could turn the game down even lower. However, the RX 6600 is doubling its performance at 100 FPS, the 4060 is 2.7 times the speed at 135 FPS, and the 6700 XT is almost 3 times faster. If we move up to 1440p resolution, we see the 1060 really struggling here at 35 FPS. You could play it. The 6600 is again doubling the performance at 71 FPS. The 4060 is 2.7 times faster at 95 FPS, and the 6700 XT is over 3 times faster at 109 FPS. So definitely getting a major upgrade if you did go with any of those other GPUs. Now, let's go ahead and look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 at 1080p at the balanced preset, and the 1060 is able to get 52 FPS here. Now, you could upscale or turn things down even further, but at the balanced preset, a card like the 6600 from AMD is offering 2.27 times the performance at 118 FPS. The 4060 is 2.75 times the performance of the 1060 at 143 FPS, and the 6700 XT is 3.27 times the speed speed. If we move up to 1440p, we see the 1060 struggling even worse here at 34 FPS. The 6600 is at 81 FPS, which is 2.38 times faster. The 4060 is at 99 FPS, which is 2.91 times faster. And the 6700 XT is 3.68 times faster at 125 FPS, even at 1440p resolution here. So you can see once again in this title that we are getting, again, major upgrades. What about a game like Cyberpunk, which is actually a couple years old at this point? If we look at it at 1080p Ultra, the 1060 is struggling to offer a little bit below a 30 FPS experience at these settings. Obviously, you could turn things down, but if you buy a newer GPU, you don't really need to. The 6600 is over doubling its performance at 62 FPS. The 4060 is 2.79 times faster at 81 FPS, and the 6700 XT is at over 3 times faster at 91 FPS. If you go up to 1440p Ultra settings, and here I actually used quality upscaling, FSR, on all the GPUs except the 4060, which can use DLSS, we see the 1060 only at 22 FPS. The 6600 isn't exactly crushing it, but it's very playable at 46 FPS, and obviously you could turn settings down further, and it's more than doubling the performance. The 4060 is 2.64 times faster than the 1060 at 58 FPS, and the 6700 XT is at 69 nice FPS, 3.14 times faster than the 1060. If we move into a current gen console only game with a Plague Tale Requiem at 1080p Ultra, we can see that the 1060 is only at 27 FPS, so you'd still need to turn things down to even get 30. The 6600 is at 49 FPS, 1.82 times the speed of the 1060. The 4060 is over 60 FPS, 65, it's 2.41 times faster than the 1060, and 6700 XT is at 72 FPS, 2.67 times the 1060 speed. At 1440p Ultra, none of the GPUs actually hit 60 FPS, although the 6700 XT is offering 50 FPS, and it is 2.78 times faster than the 1060. The 4060 is 2.39 times faster than the 1060 at 43 FPS, and the 6600 is at least able to pull out over 30 FPS and 1.78 times the speed of the 1060. So really, all of these GPUs would probably want to upscale a bit or something, or turn settings down a bit at 1440p in that game. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, another current gen only game at 1080p epic settings. A card like the 6700 XT is getting 87 FPS and is over 3.3 times faster than the 1060. Even the 4060 is getting a 71 FPS, 2.73 times faster than the 1060. And the 6600 is getting us 55 FPS, so yeah, it's short of 60, but if you're on a variable refresh rate display, it's pretty dang usable. At 1440p epic settings, the 6700 XT is getting us 54 FPS, so not quite a lock 60, but still pretty good. The 4060 is at 2.75 times the speed of the 1060 at 44 FPS, and the 6600 is more than doubling the performance of the 1060 at 33 FPS, and the 1060 is hanging out at 16 FPS. Of course, the 1060 could turn things way down and upscale quite a bit and get a much more usable experience, but again, these other GPUs might not have to. Look at an Unreal Engine 5 game, although not a very demanding one, with Layers of Fear, 1080p high. We are seeing the 1060 over 30 FPS at 37 FPS, but the 6600 does get 1.78 times the performance at 66 FPS. The 4060 gets 2.57 times the performance at 95 FPS, and the 6700 XT hits 100 FPS. At 1440p high settings, the 1060 hits 23 FPS, the 6600 hits 41, the 4060 is hitting 58 FPS, which is 2.52 times the speed of the 1060, and the 6700 XT is hitting 65 FPS at 2.83 times the speed of the 1060. And again, we will see much more demanding Unreal Engine 5 games coming up soon. Returnal is a PlayStation 5 exclusive on console that's been ported to PC, although it's not the most demanding one. Here we see the 1060 averaging 34 FPS in the built-in benchmark run, and the 6600 is 1.91 times the speed at 65 FPS. The 4060 is jumping up to 83 FPS, 2.44 times the speed of the 1060, and the 6700 XT is at 93 FPS, 2.74 times the speed of the 1060. If we go up to 1440 1440p resolution at epic settings again. The 4060 is still able to offer around 61 FPS, 2.44 times the speed of the 1060, and the 6700 XT is at 69 nice FPS again, 2.76 times the speed of the 1060. Even the 6600 is much more playable than the 1060 at 46 FPS, which is 1.84 times the 25 FPS that the 1060 is giving us here. Again, you could turn down settings on all the GPUs. Another PlayStation 5 exclusive is The Last of Us Part 1. This was tested on patch 1.1, which had a lot better performance than at launch. And at 1080p Ultra settings, the 1060 is only good for 22 FPS. You definitely need to turn things down quite a bit to even hit 30. The 6600 is at 42 FPS, so playable, and 1.91 times the performance of the 1060. The 4060 is at 76 FPS, which is 3.46 times the performance of the 1060, and the 6700 XT is 3.86 times the performance of the 1060 at 85 FPS. If in this game, this one's very VRAM heavy, so I thought let's turn down to high settings to rein in the VRAM a bit. And the 1060 here does offer 32 FPS. The 6600 is now over 60 at 65 FPS and is doubling the performance of the 1060. The 4060 is now 2.91 times the performance of the 1060, offering 93 FPS, and the 6700 XT is at 111 FPS, offering 3.47 times the performance of the 1060. And we can see here that going down to the high settings to rein in the VRAM a bit certainly helped a lot of these GPUs. If we go up to 1440p and back to the Ultra preset though, we see that only the 6700 XT, which is a 12 gigabyte GPU, is giving us a 60 FPS experience here, and it's 4.29 times the performance of the 1060, which is only a 6 gigabyte card, which is way down at 14 FPS. The 4060 is offering us 42 FPS, which is 3 times the performance of the 1060, and the 6600 is offering us 1.93 times the performance of the 1060 at 27 FPS. But again, those are 6600 and the 4060 are 8 gigabyte cards, which we're struggling a bit there. If we drop down to the high settings, we're not so badly going over 8 gigabytes that the 8 gigabyte cards do a lot better here. The 1060 is up to 19 FPS, the 6600 more than doubles that at 41 FPS, and the 4060 is now able to get us over 60 FPS and is 3.21 times the performance of the 1060 here. And the 6700 XT is 4 times the performance of the 1060 at 76 FPS. So what did we learn here? I mean, I think we learned that first of all, the 1060 certainly can still play some games, and the settings I was using here weren't really appropriate for the 1060. I was using settings appropriate to the newer GPUs that we were looking to upgrade to. And so while I think we did show that you can get, almost double the performance from going up to 6600, which is available under $200 right now. Again, you can sell your GPU to help fund some of that upgrade. And really get a pretty affordable upgrade here for the with going with something like the 6600. Even we've seen that the 4060, while not tripling the performance, actually gets pretty close sometimes. And then a card like the 6700 XT actually a lot of times is tripling the performance or more. In some examples where the VRAM's super heavy, you're getting almost 4 times the performance. I think we saw that like with 1440p Ultra in The Last of Us. Again, not appropriate settings for the 1060. But there is a lot of increased performance on the table for not too much money right now if you are coming from something like the 1060. So even though new GPUs like the 4060 might not be very exciting, and you might, there certainly is a lot of upgrade available on the table at a similar price to what you probably paid for your 1060. That being said, you could also go with the just keep waiting route. So the footage I'm about to show you here is from a recent video I did looking at a mobile GPU, the Radeon 780M. It's an integrated APU. It's not even a discrete graphics card. And I was using the GTX 1060 as kind of a baseline up against that. So you can look at the frame rate numbers up here for our 1060. But the thing is, in this video, I was testing much lower settings. So we can see like in Cyberpunk at 1080p low settings, we're up in the mid 40s. You could even kick on some FSR2 quality and upscale, and now you actually are over 60 FPS on average in the Cyberpunk built-in benchmark run at least. you know, there's a whole bunch of other settings and things that you could look at. Games like The Last of Us, which were so VRAM heavy, well, if you go down to medium settings and kick on FSR2 quality, so yeah, it's going to be a little bit pixelated, things won't look quite as good. Now you're up in the mid-40s in a single-player game like this that's still very playable, especially if you have a variable refresh rate screen. You also go down to low settings with FSR quality and actually be close to 60 FPS. So again, the 1060 certainly is very playable, even in the latest titles, if you're willing to turn the settings down. And there's also just less demanding games out there. Things like Forza Horizon 5, 1080p high settings were well over 60 FPS. And even, you know, Resident Evil actually scales very well. If you go down to, a more of a balanced setting and maybe with some FSR, you actually can get around a 60 FPS experience. So it's not like things are completely unusable there on the 1060. So if you do want to keep waiting, go ahead and keep waiting. And also, I'm testing a lot of the most recent games, and I think that something about the Steam hardware survey and a lot of these GPUs hanging out here, these 1650, the 1060, 1050 Ti, things like that, is, well, they're not necessarily playing the latest AAA games. They might be. But, you know, some of the more popular games are still older esports games. If you're playing CSGO or something like that, do you really need anything better than a 1060? So, again, I think a lot of people could just wait. Because if in the games that you play, you're happy with the performance that you're getting, then, go ahead. Don't rush out there. But if you are starting to be unhappy with the performance that you're getting, don't necessarily be scared of the fact that, you know, the 4060 should have been a little bit less expensive. Maybe it should have been called a 4050 and cost around $250 or something like that. But again, it is gonna, almost triple or even triple your performance in some situations. Also, the newer GPUs are going to offer some advantages. Cards like the 4060 are going to offer an AV1 encoder if you are streaming or have any use for that. Cards like the newer NVIDIA GPUs will also have DLSS, and the 40 series would have DLSS frame generation, which I didn't really look at here in this video. Whereas cards like the AMD GPUs here do just use the same FSR upscaling that the 1060 is able to use, but they do offer significantly more performance and at a very good price. And the 6700 XT getting you that 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I think where some of the disappointment here might come from is that the 1060, when it came out in this kind of price range, it was crushing games. The 1066 gigabyte was doing a very good job, especially if you're playing at something like 1080p. When it came out, had a lot of headroom for the future. Whereas we see cards like the 4060 here, it's performing well in the latest games, but not necessarily just like mind-blowing frame rate results. And you'll certainly, I think, be needing to turn things down a little bit more in the future, and especially if you're trying to play games at 1440p, things like that. So I get it. And the 6700 XT does have that extra VRAM, which I think will be useful for longevity. Because if you're somebody who's hung on to a 1066 gigabyte for the last, how many years is it now? 6 or 7 years. The longevity of the extra VRAM on something like the 6700 XT is certainly nothing to just gloss over. But again, with tweaking settings, cards like the 4060 with 8 gigabytes are certainly very usable. I'm not trying to tell you exactly which of these you should upgrade to, or even saying you should upgrade. I'm just trying to make sure you guys are aware of what kind of performance uplift is on the table if you do go ahead and go with the upgrade. And again, don't forget that you can sell your current GPU to help fund that purchase. Hope you guys found this video interesting and useful, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.